Morning, everyone. First reading is from Mark. That's Mark chapter 8, verses 22 to 26. The healing of a blind man at Bethsaida. They came to Bethsaida, and some people brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. When he had spit on the man's eyes and put his hands on him, Jesus asked, "Do you see anything?" He looked up and said, "I see people. They look like trees walking around." Once more Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes. Then his eyes were opened, his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Jesus sent him home, saying, "Don't go into the village." Second reading is from John chapter 4, verses 43 to 54. Jesus heals the official's son. After the 2 days he left for Galilee. Now Jesus himself had pointed out that a prophet has no honour in his own country. When he arrived in Galilee, the Galileans welcomed him. They had seen all that he had done in Jerusalem at the Passover feast, for they also had been there. Once more he visited Cana in Galilee, where he had turned the water into wine. And there was a certain royal official whose son lay sick at Capernaum. When this man heard that Jesus had arrived in Galilee from Judea, he went to him and begged him to come and heal his son, who was close to death. "Unless you people see miraculous signs and wonders," Jesus told him, "you will never believe." The royal official said, "Sir, come down before my child dies." Jesus replied, "You may go, your son will live." The man took Jesus at his word and departed. While he was still on the way, his servant met him with the news that his boy was living. When he inquired as to the time when his son got better, they said to him, "The fever has left him yesterday at the 7th hour." Then the father realized that this was the exact time at which Jesus had said to him, "Your son will live." So he and all his household believed. This was the second miraculous sign that Jesus performed, having come from Judea to Galilee.
Okay, super. So while I was sitting there, I was just thinking, me making my joke about Butlins food and fry-ups and things like that. Don't get too excited about the idea that the banqueting table in heaven will be full of meat products. If you read the book of Genesis, you'll discover that before the fall, Adam and Eve, and potentially all human beings, lived on a fully vegetarian diet. So that may also be how it is. That's just for purposes of inclusion, everybody. Right, so what have we got here this morning? Well, it's fairly clear, I think, that we're going to be talking about healing this morning. We're not going to be just talking about healing, we're going to be doing it. Okay? So a bit like a few weeks ago on Pentecost, I came up and announced, we're all going to speak in tongues this morning, and you all did. And you'll remember how we accomplished that and how painless, hopefully, it was. This morning, I'm not saying we're all going to get healed or we're all going to be healers, but we are going to be doing some healing ministry in a little while after we've sung our next couple of songs. So let's just get some lead up on this, because healing is one of those things, like the gift of tongues, that really alarms people. Healing is, after all, a spiritual gift, and it's given to some, but not to all. However, a bit like the use of tongues and the use of prophecy in worship, it's something that a lot of people can get involved with, far more than people give themselves credit for. You might think to yourself, "Oh no, I can't do that." And part of the reason behind that is that you don't want to look stupid. Sometimes the reason why we don't go off and pray in tongues, even on our own, is because we don't want to feel stupid. We want to feel happy with ourselves. We think, what if I pray for somebody? What if I lay hands on someone and pray for them to be healed and they aren't healed? I will be embarrassed. And so it puts us off. And so sometimes we don't do it. And I've known a lot of people over a lot of years who've had really strong prayer ministry. And it's quite clear that the Spirit has gifted them. And they enact this healing ministry all of the time. Sometimes in gathered occasions like an act of worship, but sometimes just here, there and everywhere. I've mentioned Compassion UK previously. I once went over to Kenya to visit a project that our church was paired with, a Compassion project, and we met all these little children who were living in extreme poverty. And the guy who was running it, the Compassion UK man, who I'm a total fan of, except I can't remember his name, Tim Robertson. You may even see him if you go to Spring Harvest next year. He'll probably be there on the stand, on the Compassion stand. And famously, we went to Spring Harvest one year, and Adele went up to him and gave him a real going over, giving it this, because she felt that he wasn't making enough of Compassion at Spring Harvest. He just laughed in her face. And that's kind of the sort of bloke he is. He's a totally top bloke, full of wisdom, full of the Lord. And he was there in this project, and he was walking around. We were all walking around amongst these children, and all was very interested in seeing us. And there was a girl who clearly had something wrong with her eyes. She probably had limited vision. She wasn't completely blind, but her eyes have definitely something wrong. And just in passing, he went up to her and held his hand over her head and said, "Lord, will you please heal this little girl's vision?" And then having done that, he moved on. It was no more made of it than that. And subsequently, whether the Lord did heal this little girl's eyes, I don't know. But the fact is, he put the prayer in. And he could have just, like me, not even thought about doing it. I felt bad afterwards. I thought, he's just done something that I should have done, you know. And I should do, and seek out opportunities to say, can I just pray for you for whatever the situation might be? And we're going to do a bit of that in a minute here in our church. But let's get the context first. We've got two healings in our readings this morning that Jesus did. The first of these is the healing of the blind man. And it's kind of interesting, really, except I can't find it now. Where is it? Mark 8. It's interesting the way that Jesus does all this spitting lark. By the way, we don't want any spitting in church this morning. But he does it quite a lot, really. That people brought the blind man to him, begged Jesus to touch him. He takes the blind man by the hand and he leads him outside the village. Why? Because he wants to get a bit of privacy. So there isn't this big crowd pushing in all the way. Healing is not a spectator sport. That's really important. It's not a show. He takes the guy off by himself. And then it says he spit on the man's eyes. I'd be like, is this really necessary? Yeah. But he does that quite a lot. He spits on the man's eyes and he puts his hands on him and sets about performing this healing. There's another occasion in John's Gospel, chapter 9, where it says that he doesn't spit on the man's eyes. There's a different man, doesn't spit on the man's eyes. He spits on the ground and he makes, sorry about the sound effects, and then he sort of makes, with the spit and the dust, a paste. Rather revolting paste. And then he rubs it on the man's eyes and prays for him. I know you're laughing, it sounds bizarre, doesn't it? This is the way Jesus chose to heal. There's another occasion in Mark 7 where Jesus is healing a man who can't speak and can't hear. And what he does is he places his hands on his tongue and he places his hands on his ears and he spits on the ground. Which I just find these nuts and bolts of the healing process really interesting. This is the way that Jesus did it, the Son of God. So he gets his hands on the man and then just spits to one side. What's he doing? Is he taking whatever the blockage is, whatever the problem is he spitting it out in some spiritual way? But it's very demonstrative, isn't it? It's very there. It's not airy-fairy. Spitting in a man's eyes is not an airy-fairy thing to do. I'm going to heal you. Here's the interesting thing about the man in Mark 8. When he had spit on the man's eyes and put his hands on him, Jesus said, "Do you see anything?" And the man said, rather surprisingly, he looked up and he looks around and he says, "I can see people, but they look like trees walking around." Now, what does that mean? I'm guessing they look blurry. Now, this is a man who, I'm just checking to see, it doesn't say that he'd been blind from birth, so potentially the man had been able to see at some point in his life. Here he is seeing shapes that he hasn't seen anything for a long time, but he can't quite discern what they are. And Jesus, therefore, does it again. He puts his hands on the man's eyes, and then the healing becomes complete. His sight is restored. It says he saw everything clearly. And Jesus said, go home, don't even go into the village. Why does he do that? Because this is early in Jesus' ministry and he doesn't want everything to go wrong. These things that he's doing, he's healing people because he has compassion on them. So he sees a person who's obviously got a problem or someone's brought to him, and Jesus wants to help because he loves that person. And Jesus wants to help you because he loves you with whatever it is that you're dealing with in life at any given time. He wants to help you with it. So there's that. But then there's the other reason why Jesus did healings. And the reason that Jesus did healings was primarily to declare the kingdom of God. So Jesus healed everyone who was brought to him, but he didn't systematically go around every person that he met in every place in order to heal them. He didn't heal everyone. He healed some people, but he healed everyone who was brought to him. So he said, don't turn this into a publicity stunt. Don't sort of make this a big sort of, sideshow thing. Don't even go to the village. Just be grateful for what God has done for you. Go home and rejoice and get on with your life. But the really crucial thing about this healing for me and for our purposes this morning is that it's quite clear that even for Jesus, and this is a unique occasion in Jesus' ministry, he had to pray twice. So he prays once for healing, and it kind of happens, but it doesn't fully happen. And Jesus has to go at it again. So here's what we learn from this. Sometimes as we pray in the Spirit for one another, for whatever it is, a physical problem, an emotional problem, a mental health problem, whatever it might be, sometimes the Lord will heal instantly, and sometimes it's a process. You may have to give it a couple of goes. You may have to return to it in a week or two's time. You may have to keep going at it for a fairly extended period of time. Every now and again, pray for that person or pray for yourself in order for that healing to take place. Remember last week we were talking about the persistence of prayer. The guy who wants to borrow a loaf of bread from his mate who's in bed, it's the middle of the night, and he says, I'm not getting up and giving you loaves of bread now, but because he's persistent and because he's his friend, eventually he does it. So like any form of prayer where we're asking for something, we need to be persistent in asking for that healing in order that we might receive it. And remember, God does not always heal in the way that we might expect. So don't be disappointed if nothing appears to happen. Something usually is happening, but we don't always perceive it. But trust in it and go for it and realize that we need to be persistent sometimes. And sometimes the Lord doesn't heal you. Remember that Paul said, I've got this thorn in my flesh, which refers to some sort of medical issue that he was dealing with. And he says, I've prayed 3 times. I've been persistent. Lord, please take away whatever my problem is. But the Lord hasn't. He's kept it. It's something I've got to bear. It's something I've got to carry. It's my burden. And many of us have particular health issues. We've just got to live with them. They are part of us. They're part of who we are. And we walk with them and we bear them. And sometimes the Lord will heal that thing, whatever it is, at some point in our lives. And sometimes he won't. Sometimes it's something that we continue to live with. In these situations, we become a bit like Job, where we say, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. I'm going to keep praising him. He's not going to give me everything I want. He's not going to spoil me like in that way. But he will give me everything that I need. And sometimes our idea of what we need is very different to what God's is. When Jesus heals, he is proclaiming the kingdom. And that is definitely what we see in John's Gospel, chapter 4, where Jesus heals the official's son. Let's get the context of this down. So this is fairly early in Jesus' ministry, and he's been in Galilee. That's where he's from. And then he goes back there. And it says in brackets in verse 44, Jesus himself had pointed out that a prophet has no honor in his own country. And that can be true. I've known the truth of that. The place where you originate, the place where you are brought up and everybody thinks they know you. So sometimes you have to move away from that place in order to be effective in your life. And Jesus had traveled around and done stuff in other areas, but he deliberately goes back to where he comes from. And he said, don't expect us to get any particular recognition here. In fact, there's on occasion, sometimes Jesus tried to heal in those communities, and even he was unsuccessful because people were just too resistant to it. they thought, well, it's only Jesus. We know him. We know his dad. We know his mum. We know his brothers and sisters. It's only him. And so they didn't have the faith to accept the healing that he brought. Anyway, there he is in Galilee. The Galileans welcome him. They've seen what he's done in Jerusalem. They've seen the healings and the signs there. And the trouble is they have turned out to see him do more magic tricks. Because remember, it's in Cana where he turned water into wine at the wedding, the first miracle that Jesus did. So people turn up and they're like, oh, more of this, please, Lord. Yeah, we'll cheerfully have more wine, thank you very much. And anything else you want to supply, that would be brilliant. They're not really interested in believing, putting their faith in God. What they're interested in is seeing some exciting stuff happen. Anyway, you've got a royal official. So that's a very important person in that community, a royal official. And his son is ill in Capernaum. The man comes to him and the man wants him to heal. He wants him to heal because obviously he wants his son to be better. But Jesus looks at him and he can see that his motives are not driven by a desire to believe in God. This royal official just gets on with his life and doesn't do much about his religious observance by implication. And Jesus says, unless you people see miracles, he says, signs and wonders, he says, you'll never believe. You need me to do all these stunts, to do these things, these impossible things, or you won't believe unless I do them. Should be the other way round, Jesus is saying. Put your faith in God. Believe that there's a God. Believe that he loves you, and then you will start seeing amazing things happen. But the man is persistent. That persistence is really important. He's going, oh, come on, Jesus. He begged him, please, will you just come to my house and heal my son? He's going to die. This is serious. This is serious stuff. Jesus says, just go. You can go. Your son will live. It says the man took Jesus at his word. I'm not quite sure what that means. It could say the man absolutely believed him in that moment. All right, that's it. A healing has taken place. But I suspect not. I suspect the man came away from that meeting with Jesus thinking, oh, well, he kind of sent me away, really. He kind of said that my child wouldn't die. I suppose that's something, but I'll just have to see what happened. He won't come, though, will he? He won't come and heal my boy. And then when he gets home, his servants meet him. The boy's alive. And then can I just ask, says the royal official of his servants, what time did he suddenly recover? And works out that the fever that the boy was suffering had left him at exactly the time when Jesus had said to his dad, your son will live. What does this teach us? Again, it teaches us that we need to be persistent. We need to be asking for healing for the right reasons, not as a sideshow, not as a show-off, not as a, ooh, this is exciting, but just as a genuine desire to seek wholeness from God, which can come in many ways, some obvious and some not. But also that Jesus can heal from a distance. He doesn't even need to be right there with the person. It's not the only time that Jesus heals from a distance. In John, I forget where it is now, chapter 9 was it, where I mentioned about the spitting on the ground and making the paste. When he's rubbed it into the man's eyes, he says to him, now go and wash yourself in a certain pool. And it's when the man gets to that place that he receives the healing. It's not there and then with Jesus. So this is important. You may pray with someone this morning for healing, and that person may not necessarily exhibit any signs of being healed. But they may go home and they may experience their healing later. I've had countless examples of people who've been prayed for in a church service or something like that, and it's kind of like, please heal this person of whatever it is that the problem is, and they've felt nothing. And then they've gone home, and that night they've had the first decent night's sleep that they've had for many, many weeks, because God is working on their problem. Remember, that could be a problem of, I don't know, a sprained ankle, or it could be a problem of anxiety. It could be anything. But the Lord is compassionate towards us. Sometimes he heals, and sometimes he doesn't. Remember that the Lord has brought us into a situation where we have doctors and surgeons and nurses and medical science, and that's all part of God's healing process as well. This is how he's ordained it to be. It's very important that we don't get into the idea that as Christians we shouldn't receive medical treatment, that we should rely purely on spiritual healing. That is not the case. But when Jesus does heal, he does it to proclaim to us and to every other Christian that he's here and that he's interested and that he's doing things. And he might just say, just keep it quiet, go home and enjoy the fact that I'm working on you and I'm bringing you to healing. It may be instant or it may take a while. We're going to sing a couple of songs now. I invite the musicians to step forward. And towards the end of the second song, I'm just going to invite anyone who would like to be prayed for in our service for healing, for whatever it might be, physical, emotional, spiritual, or a mental health issue. I would ask you at that point just to stand up where you are. And then, folks, anybody in the church, we know how to do this, we've done it before. If you see someone standing, gather round them and lay a hand on them. You may, if you do touch them, just touch them on the shoulder, or you may just keep your hand from them. I would like you, unusually, we haven't done it this way, the person who wants healing, would you tell those who are praying for you what it is that you would like praying for? It may be that you're standing for another person and you want some remote prayer for healing for another person. Tell them who that person is. You might not want to use their name. That's absolutely fine. But say what the issue is, and then they can pray for you silently or with words. They can just stand with you, and we can feel the presence of Jesus and his healing ministry amongst us. If you don't ask, you don't get. We're going to share in the sacrament after that, a point where we meet with the Lord through the bread and the wine and claim the power of his cross. But this morning too, we want to claim his healing power with us.